Just making sure I spelled your name right on the Broadway page. So Cyndi Kaye is an MFA candidate in fiction at San Francisco State University and the recipient of the Edward B. Kaufman College of Liberal and Creative Arts Scholarship. She has a BA in English from Stanford and a JD from Northwestern, Dr. Cyndi Kaye, Northwestern University School of Law. She's worked as an attorney and a mom. Technically, she's still both. Her stories have appeared in Red Wheelbarrow Literary Magazine and the Palo Alto Weekly. Everyone, Cyndi.
So I'm going to read two short-ish pieces. The first one is fiction, and the next one is non-fiction. The fiction one, excuse me, is entitled Squeezing Oranges. I once wrote a poem about death, Nina said. It was in 7th grade, around 1970. It was long, lines, stanzas, on and on about what was death, where did we go when we died. Nina paused to take a breath. Abby could clearly hear the rattle now. Remember Robert, Nina asked? That boy who sat next to me in math with Mrs. Linden? Abby nodded, but she didn't remember. I showed the poem to him once. He liked it, said it was so great, asked me for a copy. Nina motioned for Abby to roll her chair toward the window. I love this view of the parking lot at night, Nina said. So few cars. Like children in a grade school play, scattered, forgetting their lines, avoiding the spotlights. Her voice was raspy. I imagined them beckoning me to come down there and direct. Abby understood, but stayed quiet. She remembered a similar feeling peering out the window of their grandmother's Jackson Heights garden apartment. As children, she and Nina traveled every year with their parents from their Oak Park home to visit their grandmother in New York. Abby always chose to sleep in the small guest bedroom, the twin-size bed covered by a down comforter and a strong scent of mothballs, the head of the bed pushed up against the window. At night, Abby would roll under the untucked comforter until she was wrapped up in it cocoon-like, lying on her side with only her face and arms exposed. Then she would reach up behind her to twist open the wood window blinds, maneuver her comforter's swaddled self into a sitting position, and watch until she fell asleep, the slatted, street-light-lit quiet of the Jackson Heights intersection outside. It wasn't a busy intersection at night. Usually Abby would see nothing more than the traffic lights change colors, a few cars, a pedestrian silently crossing the street. She'd wonder where they were going, the cars and the people, out in the dark while she was in bed curled up in her comforter, watching them. She'd wonder why the traffic lights changed when no cars came. Somehow, Abby felt, the lights, the cars, the people, they all knew she was watching. Even now, Abby could recall that childhood feeling so clearly, at once both captivating and terrifying, like losing a sister, perhaps. Did you give Robert a copy of your poem? Abby asked. No, Mom told me not to. Nina adjusted the IV needle taped to the back of her hand. She thought he might rewrite it and put his name on it or something like that. I thought she was crazy, but I listened to her, like I always did. Abby hadn't always listened to their mother. She was the younger, headstrong one, the one who chose to do things her way. Abby had moved away from Nina and their parents, first for Stanford, then for her burgeoning musical career and high-tech husband, while Nina, the firstborn, had stayed. And then Nina had stolen their grandmother's piano from Abby, and Abby had had no intention of ever talking to Nina again. In their grandmother's apartment, Nina had slept on the sleeper sofa in the living room, going to bed early so she could wake up early and help their grandmother squeeze oranges for their breakfast. That meant that each evening Abby had to stop playing on their grandmother's black Kanabi baby grand piano so that Nina could sleep. Their mother had learned to play on the Kanabi, purchased despite money being tight after the war and dwarfing in stature the other living room furniture. But it was Abby who would become the accomplished pianist, commuting on the Chicago train for conservatory lessons, spending hours and hours practicing on the Kanabi after their grandmother had died and the piano had come to live with them in the Midwest suburbs. The same piano their mother promised would someday be Abby's every time Abby visited from her San Francisco home and play their mother her favorite mazurkas. The same piano which wasn't itemized in the will Nina had helped their mother update, and now collected dust in Nina's Chicago condominium because Nina was there after their mother died to clean out their childhood home and fill in the shipping requirements. Nina could go to hell, Abby had thought then. Nina, who had quit piano lessons in 6th grade and then quit playing the trumpet in high school after the third chair trombonist emptied his spit valve down the back of her shirt.
Oh.
Nina, who Abby knew would never forgive Abby for leaving her with their aging parents, or forget that Abby's music, even played over the phone long distance, had seemed to make their mother happier in her last years than any legal case Nina had won, or the groceries she had brought their mother each week. But I cared about that piano, Abby thought, as she watched her sister's frail hands stretch, fold, and unfold. And you could have filled in the bill of lading for the piano with my address instead of yours. So simple. The moving company was already set to drive west with my old bedroom furniture and our parents' dining room set. During the years of silence that had followed, Abby would sometimes dream that Nina was prosecuting her for some act of criminal negligence, calling their parents' ghosts as material witnesses. But then Nina had gotten sick and was alone, and Abby had dropped everything and come back to help her. An emulsified version of sisterhood, Abby had thought, frequently repulsed, but always connected. At the end of the school year, I couldn't find my poem, Nina said, staring straight out the window. I'd never made any copies, and there weren't computers then, no saved documents. I couldn't find it anywhere. She stopped to cough and clear her throat. I couldn't rewrite it because I'd forgotten how it went, how many lines and stanzas it had, why I'd written it in the first place. Abby sat down in the corner chair near the rolling table, holding Nina's barely eaten meal. Abby's options for dinner that evening were waning. The hospital cafeteria would be closing soon. But she had more time left to eat. I hadn't thought about that poem in over 40 years, Nina said. And then this morning, a new nurse changed my IV. His name was Robert. Suddenly, all I could think about was that damn poem, imagining the prizes I would have won, the attention, the headlines like, "Middle school girl poet stuns literary world with poem about death." Nina glanced back over her shoulder at Abby. Abby ached to say something about anger or guilt or missed opportunities, about not wanting to inherit the piano this way, but still wanting the piano. Though what would be the point now? Why not write a new poem, Abby asked, you know, for something to do. It doesn't have to be about death. Nina laughed. No, it should be about death. I'll call it Revisiting, no, wait, my second stab at death. She turned back to the window. But this time, I'll give Nurse Robert a copy. And the nonfiction piece is called The Real Erica Kane. I don't know if anybody knows who that is. I'm all my children.
Oh, okay. I remember that show.
You'll hear about it. In 1972, when my friend Connie and I were 5th graders in suburban Chicago, Connie introduced me to daytime soap operas so I could learn about things of which I had no first-hand knowledge. Things that Connie already understood. Love triangles, how to successfully ruin the social and business reputation of others. Dead people coming back to life as their previously unknown evil twin. Connie and her family had moved to our neighborhood that past summer. She was the youngest of 4 children, one brother in junior high, and 17-year-old twin siblings comprised of a brother with long hair and gigantic stereo speakers, and a glamorous sister with shorter hair and bright blue eyeshadow. Connie's mother had a stage name, although I never knew where or what she was performing, and I have no recollection of meeting her father. I thought Connie knew everything, and Connie wanted me to catch up to her in knowing things, hence the soap operas. Back then, if you lived close enough to your elementary school, you could walk home for lunch. I walked home most days, as my mother was always home, but on the days when Connie's mother wasn't performing, Connie and I would have lunch at her house. We'd eat our SpaghettiOs or cream cheese and jelly sandwiches in front of the television watching All My Children on each weekday from noon to 12:30 on Channel 7. My mother wouldn't let me watch soap operas at our house, but soap opera storylines, while always life-threatening and dramatic, moved forward sluggishly, so I never seemed to fall too far behind in the action on the days I went to my home for lunch and watched cartoons with my younger brother. In early 1973, following the Roe v. Wade Supreme Court decision, Erica Kane, a character on All My Children, had daytime television's first legal abortion. Erica was married to Dr. Jeff Martin at the time, bored with domestic life, and beginning to get work as a model. When she became pregnant, she decided to secretly terminate her pregnancy so that she wouldn't gain weight and compromise her fledgling career. For 11-year-old Connie and me, Erica's decision made perfect sense. Why have a baby when you could be a model? After all, we had Roe v. Wade's permission to legally choose abortion. The Equal Rights Amendment had recently passed both houses of Congress, and there were more and more women entering the workforce. There would be plenty of time for babies later on. Luckily, that winter, Connie's mother was frequently home at lunchtime, and we were able to see Erica's controversial storyline play out over warming bowls of tomato soup and goldfish crackers. Erica would suffer a potentially fatal infection from the abortion. I guess the story writers tried to appease outraged viewers in some way, but she eventually managed to pull through. 8 years later, I was home for summer break between my freshman and sophomore years of college when my grandmother, visiting us from New York, casually mentioned to me that she had had an abortion in Poland in 1946. My grandmother and I were sitting at the kitchen table discussing the trade union rights recently won by striking Polish shipyard workers, the first Eastern Bloc country to achieve such rights. Our conversation meandered back to the last time my grandmother had been in Poland following the end of World War II. At that time, my 11-year-old father, my grandmother, grandfather, and great-grandmother had just survived the Holocaust. They had returned to their home in Shortcroft, trying to reestablish their lives after losing so much and so many, and after years of living either in a Jewish ghetto or hidden in a pigeon coop by a Gentile farmer whose son, my grandfather, a physician, had helped through a severe illness. After being back in Shortcroft for a few months, my grandmother explained, she discovered that she was pregnant. This was news to me. As far as I knew, my father was an only child. What happened to the baby? I asked my grandmother. I went to the doctor and got cleaned out, she said. Why did you do that? I asked. Was it dangerous for you to have more children? No, she answered. I just didn't want any more children. And then she asked me my thoughts on Lech Walesa, the leader of the striking Polish shipyard workers. To this day, I am still stunned by my grandmother's kitchen table revelation that summer. She never spoke to me about it again, and sensing that it wasn't something on which she wanted to elaborate, I never asked her any more about it. She died in 1995. I've recently asked my father about my grandmother's abortion, but he claims it never happened, that my grandmother made it up. I'm not so sure. My father, while politically a moderate conservative, is staunchly anti-abortion. And my grandmother didn't start making up stories about her past for at least a decade after our talk. So what exactly is it that bothers me about my grandmother's abortion? I am pro-choice and always have been from the moment I learned what an abortion is, thanks to Connie and Erica Kane. While it may be hard for me personally to imagine aborting a fetus, I will always defend a woman's right to choose. So I defend my grandmother's decision all those years ago. It was her body, her experience. And yet the questions remain. Why would a woman who had lived through so much death and destruction choose to destroy what some might argue is a potential life? Why would she not see it as a conception of hope, helping in some small way to move forward in life, to regain some of what was irretrievably lost? And where was my grandfather in all of this? Did he have a say in the decision? Perhaps they made a practical decision together. Perhaps there was little food or money for another child. After all, they would soon decide to leave Poland for a displaced persons camp in Germany, and eventual immigration to the United States. But that wasn't the answer she gave me in 1981. I didn't want any more children, she had said. Maybe she didn't want to bring more life into a world filled with unspeakable horrors, many of which she had experienced firsthand. Maybe she suffered a miscarriage and didn't want to admit it. Perhaps the reduced living conditions of post-war Poland, or the stress of existing amid rampant Polish anti-Semitism, ongoing despite the Nazis' defeat, contributed to an inability to carry a child to term. And maybe, just maybe, my grandmother wanted to defiantly proclaim the right to control her own destiny, choosing to terminate an unfortunately timed pregnancy rather than admit to the ghost of Adolf Hitler that even in death he had managed to kill one more beloved Jewish child. I'll never know what really happened to my grandmother in 1946. What I do know is that if my grandmother did elect to terminate a pregnancy in Poland that year without having been the victim of rape or incest, or having her health threatened by the pregnancy, she might have been considered a criminal. Polish law in 1946 allowed for abortions only under those limited circumstances. In fact, before 1932, abortions had been banned in Poland without any exceptions. My best guess is that if my grandmother did have an abortion, she was treated either by a doctor who felt sympathy for Polish Jews attempting to make new lives for themselves after the war, or by one who felt something much less benevolent. And what about Erica Kane? Did she make the right decision for herself by terminating her pregnancy? In the world of soap opera dilemmas, there are no straightforward answers, only dragged-out melodramas, slowly revealed secrets, and cliff-hanging episode endings. However, if a soap opera character manages to stay alive between bouts of near-death experiences, and the soap opera remains popular with viewers, surprising storylines sometimes unfold. In 2005, more than 30 years after Erica's choice, All My Children revisited their groundbreaking abortion plotline, adding the previously unknown twist that Erica's aborted fetus had been successfully transplanted by the doctor performing the abortion into his infertile wife.
Oh my God.
The child, carried successfully to term by the infertile wife and conveniently raised to adulthood in another location, returned to Erica's town as a grown man and was eventually revealed to be her previously aborted son. Apparently, fans of All My Children were either entirely delighted or completely repulsed by this outrageous development. I had stopped watching All My Children many years earlier and only learned about the surprising plot in researching this essay. I admit to being both disgusted and intrigued by the impossible. I am disgusted because I feel the new storyline undermined and mocked the legitimacy and permanence of a woman's right to choose, as well as the pioneering status of the 1973 story. Even in the world of daytime soap operas, shouldn't something as important as an abortion be portrayed truthfully as an abortion? And yet, I am intrigued by the plot, trying to imagine what my grandmother would have thought about it. Later in her life, as my grandmother aged and became less ambulatory, she made fewer trips outside her apartment building and began watching many afternoon soap operas to pass the time. Her stories, she called them. I wish now that I had been able to watch some of those stories with her. Watching with my grandmother the soap opera characters' tangled lives may have sparked more intimate discussions between us. Discussions that might have further illuminated for me the circumstances surrounding my grandmother's abortion and her life in Poland after World War II. And I might have asked her what I was thinking that summer day at our kitchen table. If given the chance to relive the past, would she still make the same decision?